Welcome to the second part of this video on conditionals. You've seen the first part, so you know the basics, but how can you improve your conditionals? Well, I think there are 5 things you can do. Number 1, you can improve your pronunciation. Number 2, you can vary the tenses that you use in the conditionals. Number 3, you can also use modals in the conditionals. Number 4, you can substitute if with different words. And lastly, number 5, you can use inversions. So today we're going to go through each one of these step by step. Let's take a look at contractions. Are contractions important in conditionals when you are speaking? I think the answer is yes. If you want to sound more natural, especially in the exams, then you should try to use the contractions. First of all, let's look at the contractions that you will probably find in the first conditional main clause. Very often you have the subject here contracted with the future will. And the sound of these contractions are I'll, you'll, he'll, she'll, we'll, and they'll. So try to use this always in the first conditional. Now let's look at the second conditional main clause. Often you will have to contract the pronoun with the would, and these will be pronounced I'd, you'd, he'd, she'd, we'd, and they'd. Now on to the third conditional, but the if clause. Very often you'll have to contract the pronoun and the had. And interestingly, the contraction is exactly the same as the second conditional. Again, I'd, you'd, he'd, she'd, we'd, and they'd. Now let's have a look at the third conditional, but the main clause. Here you will have to probably contract the subject, the would, and the have. This looks complicated, doesn't it? Well, it's actually not that bad. If you look at the phonetics here, with the pronoun I, it's I'd have. It's very short. You'd have, he'd have, she'd have, we'd have, and they'd have. So I'd have married Jessica Alba, not I would have married Jessica Alba. It's much better if you can get into the habit of using these contractions, because you will sound much more natural and much more fluent in your English. And again, this will be very valuable if you are doing a speaking exam. Now let's have a look at how you can change the tenses in the conditionals and make them more interesting. Let's have a look at a few examples. Here we have a normal 0 conditional. If you go out, be careful. Well, you can substitute the present simple here for a present continuous. If you are going out, be careful. Continue. Yes? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you, yes. Thank you. If you have finished laughing, I am going to continue. Here we can see we are using, in this first conditional, we're using the present perfect instead of the present simple. And here, instead of the will, I'm using a present continuous to show future. Yeah, okay, thank you, but yeah, I know you were explaining, but the problem is some students don't ever pay attention. But if he were listening, you wouldn't need to explain again, would you? So you can see this is an improbable second conditional. And instead of using here the past simple, we've used the past continuous. Now let's move on to modals. By using modals in your conditionals, you can add a new dimension of meaning. For example, if we take this sentence from the first part of the video, if you walk under a ladder, you'll have bad luck. Well, by substituting the will for could, might, or may, we are emphasizing the possibility of this condition. Let's have a look at another example which we used in the first part of the video. If I were on my bike, I would be happy. Well, we can do the same here. This is a second conditional, but we can substitute the would with also could and might. So now this sentence is saying that it's not 100% sure that I would be happy if I were on my bike now, but it's a possibility. I could be happy. If I get a puncture or if it starts raining, then perhaps not. But it is a possibility now with the use of could or might. Have a look at this first conditional. If you understand Spanish, then you will find Italian easy. Well, we can add the idea of ability here by inserting can. If you can understand Spanish, then you will find Italian easy. So this is adding or emphasizing your ability to understand Spanish. And here is another example, but this time using a mixed conditional. We have used could to express ability here in the past. If you could ride a bike when you were young, then you can do it again in the future. And in the main clause, we have used can to emphasize the ability in the present. You can also use modals to show obligation, or in this case, moral obligation. In this sentence, we have, if you were invited to dinner last Saturday, you should have gone. The should here is expressing moral obligation, that you should have accepted the invitation. Of course, you could add other variations here. You could add possibility instead by substituting should with could or might. And here's another conditional, this time a first conditional, where the will has been substituted with should to express moral obligation again. If you want to pass the exam, you should listen to me. And one more conditional with obligation to finish. If you must clean your boots, do it outside. Here we have the combination of the modal must combined with an imperative. Substituting if with alternative words can also make your conditionals much more interesting. Now let's look at the first one, which probably everybody knows, the most common substitution. Let's take a look at this sentence. If you don't go now, you'll miss the bus. This is a conditional with a negative. So here we can change the if for unless. But we also have to change the negative verb to affirmative. So in this case, we can just delete the don't. Unless you go now, you'll miss the bus. Supposing, suppose, or what if are good alternatives, especially for questions. Look at these two sentences here. You could say, if I pay you £10, will you clean my car? But much better if you say, supposing I pay you £10, will you clean my car? Or, if you are not accepted to university, what will you do? Much better, what if you are not accepted to university? What will you do? These words emphasize that these are questions. For zero conditionals, we often substitute the if with when. When you have a snake in your pocket, you scream. Don't worry, there are no snakes in this video. Perhaps in part 1, yes, but not in part 2. And there are plenty more. I recommend that you stop the video here so you can study these better. We have even if, which we use to say that something will happen whatever the condition. Even if we leave immediately, we'll still miss the bus. We have as long as, which emphasizes the condition. As long as you behave, this is the condition, you can come with us to the restaurant. And finally, here I have if it hadn't been for or if it weren't for. Okay, and then we have to follow this with a noun phrase. Here the noun phrase is the last minute penalty. So, if it hadn't been for the last minute penalty, we would have lost the game. Or if you prefer, if it weren't for the last minute penalty, we would have lost the game. So, if you use these expressions in your exams at level B2 and above, for sure they will impress the examiners, and this will help you to get a much better mark in your writing and perhaps even in your speaking exam too. And that brings us to the last way in which you can make your conditionals more impressive. And it will also make your conditionals more dramatic and more formal. And you just need 3 words: should, were, and had. Let's look first of all at a zero conditional. If you go to the party, give me a call, using present simple and the imperative. Well, you can simply change the if to should. Should you go to the party, give me a call. It sounds more formal. And you can use the should exactly in the same way in the first conditional. If you decide to go to the party, I'll see you there. Just substitute the if with should. Should you decide to go to the party, I'll see you there. Look at this sentence. If I had read the book, I would have passed the exam. How can we make this sentence much more interesting? Well, we can substitute the if with were, and we have to substitute the had of the past perfect with the infinitive to have. So now we have, were I to have read the book, I would have passed the exam. So remember, you need to have the verb plus the subject, okay, the verb were plus the subject, I in this case, plus the infinitive, to have, and then you need to use the past participle of the main verb, in this case, read. So we have, were I to have read the book, I would have passed the exam. But this sounds very, very formal, and you probably wouldn't use it for speaking, just for writing. Hey man, what are you doing? We've got to get ready for the party. What do you think I'm doing? I'm teaching conditionals, I'm busy. You can't just walk into the class like this. And why are you wearing that shirt? Had I known that you were going to wear that Hawaiian shirt, I would have worn a different one. But now we look exactly the same. We look stupid. So, had I known you were going to wear that Hawaiian shirt, I would have worn a different one. I could have said, if I had known you were going to wear that Hawaiian shirt, I would have worn a different one. But it sounds much stronger and much better if you use had I known. All you have to do is eliminate the if and move the had in front of the subject, and then you have the inversion. It's a very easy inversion to do. And of course, it sounds much better if you use this in an exam rather than the traditional, if I had known. Yes. Had I known about the problem last week, I would have fixed it. Oh yes, fantastic. It's superb. Very, very good, yes. What are you doing? No, don't record. Don't record no, don't record this, no. Cut.